going to do? Why do I think they were going to read jury instructions
over popcorn toss
before the?
When you think about it, you think that should be on a
this is
headline
weird.
newspaper, big bold black letters: "Man killed over popcorn toss."
This is his legal argument that the media reports should be the verdict.
Yeah.
And you look at that, or you're surfing on the internet, and you see that, and you click it, and you think, well, that's sensationalized. No one could ever think that would take place. There's no way that a man was killed over a popcorn toss.
Because he wasn't.
And it's not just rhetoric in this case. It's not something that we talk about and we say as if to make a point, to make it flashy.
Invoking the media that they're not supposed to follow is a bold strategy.
You don't have to look between the lines. You don't have to say, well, maybe, possibly that's what it was over. We know that's exactly what it was over.
This is horrible.
And as sensationalized as that sounds, that's what happened. And we know that. How is it that we know that? Because 2 to 3 people in the theater heard this defendant say that right after he shot and killed Chad Olson.
2 to 3 people. He doesn't even have a number.
Threedos, Mark Turner, and the Summit Sent, Charles Cummings. These 3 people do not know each other. Derek Threedos was sitting a row in front of the Olsons and to the left. Mark Turner was sitting all the way to the right in the defendant's row. Charles Cummings was sitting a row in front of Mark Turner. All across the theater,
one whole row,
they heard the defendant say, "Throw popcorn in my face." That's
row,
why we know this case is truly about a man killing another man over a popcorn toss. These 3 people, Derek Threedos, Mark Turner, Charles Cummings, they don't know each other. They're not friends. They're not family. There is no evidence that would lead you to reasonably believe that they got together to frame the defendant, that they got together in the theater and they huddled together and they said, you know what? We don't know Curtis Reeves, but let's make up a story that he said, "Throw popcorn in my face," or some words to that extent about the popcorn.
Oh, I love the dishonesty of how this stuff
words
happens.
to that effect.
To believe they got together to frame the defendant. Some grand conspiracy.
Something nobody claimed.
This
the defense
case
never
is
claimed this.
Absolutely, unfortunately, about a man killing another man over a popcorn toss. Now, you don't have to really read too much between the lines or go
don't think about it too hard
below the surface to determine why this happened. Now, when I say
you already said it was over popcorn.
I'm not saying this as an indictment on law enforcement in general. We are only talking about the defendant. And what do we know about the defendant? Well, there's certificates and evidence. A career law enforcement officer, trained in de-escalation tactics, not only through the department.
When it's convenient to the state, the trained law enforcement officer. When it's not, he was a cop so long ago, it doesn't matter.
But how you take the most volatile situations and you de-escalate it, lower the volatility. Yet, despite all that training, instead of de-escalating the situation, the defendant instigated the situation.
The situation.
The defendant started it, and he stopped.
Like Jersey Shore.
And what you have to look at is what's happening here. Here's an individual. The defendant is a person that I submit to you based on the evidence likes those dangerous situations, likes the adrenaline, the units that he was involved in. He likes the control.
I submit to you because now, there's no evidence that that's true.
Of course there
by
isn't.
the way.
That would be silly to say. But likes the danger and likes the control. And that's how he started this, that's how he instigated it, and that's how he ended it. And that's what this case is about. It truly is about a man who killed another man over a popcorn toss. Now, the defendant wants you to believe this. And I submit to you that both versions of the events that the defendant told you are absolutely 100% not credible. And I submit that you know that already. The defendant wants you to believe this. A retired captain from the Tampa Police Department who's been involved in robbery, homicide, fugitives, the Special Weapons and Tactics Team, also known as SWAT. Remember during his testimony what he's saying. Man, it's eye-opening. When I first started, the level of violence and the dangerousness, you wouldn't believe it. Yet that very same person wants you to believe that in all his years doing all those jobs throughout Tampa. The one person that scared him the very most, the one person that he had to shoot and kill, was in theater number 10 on January 13th of 2014. The person that scared him the most is a father and a husband that said, leave me alone. I'm texting my daughter. Maybe he threw an F-bomb in there. You can't kill anyone for an F-bomb, that's for sure. Is it reasonable to believe that that person, Chad Olson, scared him the most in his entire life in that moment in theater number 10?
Maybe it was his situation that made him scarier.
He reaches and he grabs a popcorn and he throws it at him. In his entire career, that's the most he's ever been scared. Absolutely unreal and unbelievable story. The defendant in this case
it sure is
completely
interesting
out of anger. And we know
zero evidence of
the
anger
words that he stated afterwards. And not only that, you're going to have the videos back there with you. You're going to have the state video. You're going to have the defense video.
He sounded so angry when interviewed by police.
Very minor differences. Watch the reaction that the defendant has when he's shooting, because that demonstrates the anger, the explosion. And that's why those words come flying out of his mouth immediately after he shoots. He lunges forward. He's not back in a life or death struggle like he wants you to believe. And we're going to talk about his stories.
Well, we're going to talk about him.
That is absolutely not what happened. He lunges forward. And how was he able to do it so quickly? Because when he was moving back, that gun was at his hip already. That's exactly what happened. That's how he was able to fire. He already had it at the ready. We're going to talk more about that later. Now, when he's interviewed in the cruiser, think about this. Now, you have that tape statement. Listen to it as many times as you want. Okay? And again, those videos are on the computer. You're going to have a computer that's going to go back with you. So you're going to be able to look at the videos. There's a player. You can move it back and forth like we are doing on cross-examination. When you listen to that post-Miranda statement, think about it. Now, you have to rely on what you believe is in that statement. I submit to you it shows a cool, calm, and collected person telling an unbelievable story in order to justify what he had done. A very self-serving statement, and a self-serving statement does not equal self-defense. A retired police officer sitting in a cruiser, cool, calm, and collected, making up a story that is contradictory to every witness in this case. There are 7 to 9 eyewitnesses in this
That's
case.
a lie.
Yeah, that is actually not contradictory at all.
And none of them even remotely touch the story that the defendant wants you to believe, including his wife, sitting right next to him, inches away. She didn't see some violent life or death struggle. Do you think that she would have noticed something like that? Of course, because the defendant's story is 100% untrue. A self-serving story. Now, why did he tell that story? It's a great question. I submit that he told that story because he had no idea that so many people observed what happened in that theater. But here's what he really didn't expect. The silent witness. Who is the silent witness the defendant never in a million years thought
the
was going
camera
to speak the loudest words in this case? It was that video. I submit he had no idea there was a video in there. The silent witness spoke the loudest because when you watch that video, every single thing that he said was untrue. Every single thing.
Wow.
And then he came into court and took that stand and looked you in the eye and told you a completely different story from the unbelievable one in the cruiser. Why is that? Because he knows what really happened on January 13th of 2014. Just like the witnesses that came in and told you. Just like the video tells you. He shot and killed a man over a popcorn toss. He started it and he ended it. End of story. Now, we had a jury trial the past 3 weeks. When we have a jury trial, the state, sometimes people call us the government, okay? But it's the state of Florida. It's the 3 of us prosecuting this case. We have to prove the case to you beyond a reasonable doubt. That's our burden. We gladly accept it. It should be that way. Now, what is a reasonable doubt? At the conclusion of the case,
Not what
you're
you
gonna hear
have.
all of the law. I get a copy of the packet as well. You don't have to memorize the law. It's kind of complicated. We're going to go through it. I have a lot of boards and an easel. We're going to go through the law. Okay. Now, a reasonable doubt. This is part of the instruction. A reasonable doubt may come from a lack of evidence, and it may come from a conflict in the evidence. Now, I submit to you there is no lack of evidence in this case. 7 to 9 eyewitnesses and the video. And the defendant's self-serving statement. It's almost like when someone says they didn't commit a crime because they have an alibi in another county, but then it's proven that they're in the county. It's like, why make up such a story? A conflict in the evidence, let's talk about that. I submit to you, whenever there's a jury trial, there is a conflict in the evidence, right? I mean, just the very nature of a dispute is there's a conflict in the evidence. And that's not a reasonable doubt in and of itself. Because if you think about it, then you could just have some people come in and say, well, I said it's red, this person said it's blue, conflict in the evidence. How would you ever prove a case? You couldn't. So what a jury.
You actually have to prove
Honestly, what a
that the
jury
person
does is
saying
you
it's
take all
red
the
is
evidence.
wrong.
There's a lot of evidence in this case. And you got to sift through it. You got to look at it. You really got to analyze it. And you got to say to yourself, what evidence here is credible? And Judge Barkel's going to read you an instruction. And what she's going to say is you can believe all of a witness's statement. You can believe none of a witness's statement. You can believe some of it, discard some of it. That's totally up to you. And what's interesting about this case is we have a mixture of all of that. There are witnesses where you can believe everything they said. You could take some of what people said. Vivian Reeves' testimony, Jennifer Shaw's testimony. You could take some of that. Others of it, I submit, you're going to have to discard because it's certainly
Take the parts that help me and discard the parts that don't.
All this. You can completely disregard a statement. Both of the defendant's statements are completely unreasonable based on the totality of circumstances. He didn't fear anything. He wasn't vulnerable. He was an instigator. He started it and he ended it.
You can't say provoker because the judge denied that jury instruction.
A reasonable doubt. You have to take all the evidence, find out what's credible. So what you do is you take the not credible evidence, you put it aside. You take the credible evidence and you look at it. And we're going to go through the elements of the crime. So you take.
Oh, he's wearing daddy's tie today. Look at that thing.
Apply it to all the elements.
He's about to trip on it.
What you do is you start with the highest crime charge. And again, we'll talk about.
Does it end or does it actually reach the floor?
You take the credible evidence, you apply it to the law. That's how you come up with a just verdict. Now, the other instruction that is contained within a reasonable doubt is this.
It's such a scummy close that I actually want Michael Drejka to be innocent now.
Doubt, a possible doubt, or a speculative doubt. Okay, I'm going to repeat that because it's really important. It is not, and the most important two are possible doubts or speculative doubts. Those are not reasonable. So there's a story that I tell for every closing argument. Obviously, I'm going to tell it today. So let's say that it's the summertime and you're out walking your dog and it's nighttime and you hear thunder, you see lightning, you smell rain, and you go to bed. When you go to bed, you wake up and your neighborhood is soaking wet.
What he's describing is not a reasonable doubt. It's circumstantial evidence.
That it rained. Absolutely. Because common sense tells you that. And remember, you don't leave your common sense at the door. Thunder, lightning, smell of rain, your common sense, it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt it rained. Now, is it possible the neighborhood kids went walking around that night when you were sleeping? You got Christine, you got Carol, you got Jeff, and you got Bad Brian, okay? Now, is it possible that Bad Brian went out and took a super soaker gun and sprayed the whole neighborhood with water while you were sleeping? I mean, you could talk about that any day. Is it possible the sun's not going to rise? Based on the evidence,
well, the first situation is actually more likely than the sun not rising.
It's so funny. But what if you have evidence that Bad Brian was running around the neighborhood with a super soaker?
It's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that it rained. It's not possible Bad Brian did that super soaker thing. That's ridiculous. That's not reasonable.
You said it was possible.
Now, can you speculate that a helicopter went over the neighborhood with a bucket of water going to a fire and that the bucket of water landed on the neighborhood?
That the helicopter pilot just urinated out of his aircraft.
That is completely unreasonable. Can you speculate your car's not going to start tomorrow? Sure, but that's unreasonable. So those doubts are not
Depends on the
reasonable.
car, frankly.
So you got to be careful when you start getting into possibilities.
Maybe you have a
and
Toyota
speculation.
Yaris.
You have to focus on the credible evidence.
Kia Soul.
So let's talk about speculation, because there's so much speculation in this case. It's really important to talk about it up front. I'm going to call these speculations shiny objects. Because what happens with a shiny object? See, if you look at a shiny object, let's say there's a whole bunch of shiny objects floating over here. If you look at those, you're going to forget to look over here at this table where all the credible evidence is. And when you look at all that credible evidence, I submit you're going to find the defendant guilty of either murder in the
Like he's pointing
degree
to the
or
defense
of
table
manslaughter.
subconsciously when he says the credible evidence.
Because these shiny objects, if you look at them,
So I guess they got a lesser included or
really
manslaughter.
So I have a
That's
list.
their degree of
Here's one
competence in
list
their
of shiny
second-degree murder
objects.
charge.
Now, if a lot of questions are asked about a shiny object, or you yell about a shiny object,
But you're yelling
the
about a
only thing
shiny
that happens
object.
is
The
this: it doesn't
popcorn.
become any more relevant, and it doesn't become any more important. It becomes shinier. That's all that happens with shiny objects. So let's talk about all the shiny objects, the unreasonable doubts in this case.
Show us on the mannequin where Bad Brian touched you. Where Bad Brian super
The
soaked
sheriff's
you.
office should have recreated the scene, and the theater was too dark and too loud. That's a shiny object. First of all, it'd be impossible, literally impossible, to recreate that scene.
It's literally
The
been
best
done
law
in a
enforcement
courtroom
agency
before.
in the world couldn't recreate that scene. And why is that? Because think of all the moving parts. You'd have to know where everybody was seated.
But if
Not
it,
only
that's a burden on you, my friend.
Because every angle would be important.
If it can't be done, that's not an indictment of the defense.
Where the defendant was, where all the witnesses were, what the exact scene was at that exact time.
It actually
while
doesn't
they're
have
in
to
that
be exact,
angle,
though, because
while someone was
other people
talking or
than
not
Curtis's
talking.
perspective isn't important. There's no testimony that
Every
anyone was
single
obstructing
thing
his
would matter,
view
and you can't
or even
recreate the scene.
between
It's
Chad and the
impossible.
screen.
A light meter wouldn't tell you a thing. A sound meter wouldn't tell you a thing. Who tells you? Witnesses. They take a stand under
Sorry.
oath. They tell you what they saw, what they heard, and
They're
none of them
often
got together
wrong.
to frame anybody on January 13th of 2014. It's impossible to recreate the scene. So when a paid witness for the defense gets up there, Michael Knox, and talks about recreating a scene.
Well, there's plenty of room here for the defense to do a compelling close, so I hope they do.
He wouldn't bring that to you. I submit to you there would be a very long cross-examination about it. Like, how could you possibly
This is a
tell
tissue
this
paper
jury
close by the
that this scene
prosecution.
could be recreated? Plus, how would you even document that? A camera would never in a million years. Ever.
What about in 2
Man,
million years?
I wish you would have done that lengthy cross-examination.
It's a shame.
That would have been better.
Now, was it too dark? Remember at the beginning of opening arguments, I said, hey, please make sure that a witness is not pigeonholed into one word. Remember, muted, dim, dimmer, dark, darker. But one word means nothing. What's important is the picture that's painted. And you saw it happen during the trial. Now, what did all the witnesses tell you? Even Joanna Turner, and we're going to talk about her. All of them told you, yeah, it was
8
dark.
years of
It was
prosecution,
muted, it was dim, but we could
not
see.
guilty.
We could see. We could see 5 seats down. We could see 10 seats down. When we get into the theater, we can see.
Was it 5 or was
That's
it
the real
10?
evidence in this case. And what they saw was the defendant started and ended. What they saw was the defendant kill another man over a popcorn toss.
None of them
Now,
testified to
could they
that.
hear what happened? Oh, it's so loud. The previews are so loud. We couldn't possibly hear it. Well, that's not true because every witness came in here and they told you, yeah, previews are on. But we could hear. Now you think about the layout of where everyone was in that theater. You have the defendant with his wife sitting in the back row. Directly in front of them is the Olsons. Going back into the defendant's row all the way to the left of the Hamiltons. They could see, they could hear. You go all the way to the right, you have the Turners, Joanna and Mark. They could see, they could hear. Even closer is Jane Roy. She could see, she could hear. Then you have the Olsons. To the right of the Olsons, you had Charles Cumming. He could see, he could hear. Then in front of the Olsons, you have Derek Friedoff. He could see, he could hear. Nicole Olson, even Vivian Reeves. There's not a question if it's too dark or it's too loud. Now, there was.
You find it funny that one of the people literally couldn't hear on the side.
Okay? You remember Matt Reeves? We're going to talk about
where this is happening.
Okay, I would submit to you that Jennifer Shaw and Matt Reeves were in a tough situation. They were credible and not credible at the same time. But Matt Reeves said something that was really interesting. Now, think back to the defendant's first statement in the cruiser. Again,
Matt Reeves is trying not to murder this man right now.
It didn't happen. I mean, it absolutely didn't happen that way. But think about what he said. He said that while he's leaning back in this life or death struggle, he's yelling what? What's he yelling? No, 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 and whoa, whoa, whoa. What's Matt Reeves say that he heard when he came into the theater? Now, you rely on your own recollection. I'd be paraphrasing it. He said two different things, but he said, I heard, get out of my face, or something like that. And then defense counsel asked him, how did you recognize it? Well, it's my dad's voice. Of course I heard it. Now, think back. I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Think back. Who in this case said that somebody said at that point in time, get out of my face, or words to that effect, stay out of my face? You can't confuse no, no, no and whoa, whoa, whoa with get out of my face. But who told you that was said by somebody?
Guys, imagine watching someone stand up and literally just lie to people to try and get you to go to prison.
So you put it away. I told the manager for no reason. In other words, I went in and ratted him out. He was going to put it away. I was gone, around me. And he turns around in his seat and he says something about he was, I don't know, if it was any of your fucking business, I was texting my daughter or something like that. And you stay the hell out of my face. I think that's when he said that.
Okay. So who is saying that someone is saying words that are close to that? The defendant. So was Matt Reeves able to hear Chad Olson telling this defendant, basically, stay the hell out of my face, leave me alone, stop instigating me, just leave me alone?
None of that was
really
said.
Too loud. Or did Matt Reeves come in here just to try to say the defendant said it because he wanted to help out the defendant?
Or is it possible that in a loud theater, he misidentified the voice of the speaker from a decent distance away?
Matt Reeves is also the only witness that said it was nearly pitch black. Not a single witness told you that. Not a single
Of course, he had just entered the theater from a lit corridor, so of course it would look darker to him.
Shiny object. In fact, it was a super shiny object. We heard many
super
witnesses.
Shiny.
Extensive cross-examination. There was a suggestion that the sheriff's office investigation was bad. I'm going to use a very non-legal term here. There's a suggestion that the sheriff's office investigation was crappy.
Oh,
You know what? The sheriff's office investigation was crappy. Absolutely. It was a terrible investigation. There's no doubt about that. You could bring in one witness, you could bring in 50 witnesses. There's not a single person that would listen to this case and say, wow, they did a fantastic job.
That should be an acquittal right there.
yeah, I was going to say, then not guilty.
Great job.
That'd actually be a big part of my clothes.
But it's an incredibly shiny object.
Who said this was a crappy investigation? That prosecutor.
Because in reality, it doesn't mean a single thing in this case. Now, do we want law enforcement to do a great job? Of course we do. Kidding me? But in this case, it didn't mean a thing because we brought in witnesses, eyewitnesses, credible eyewitnesses. And you saw how they were cross-examined. They were tested. It doesn't mean a thing that the sheriff's office didn't do a great investigation. Think about all the witnesses that testified in this case. I'm going to try to name the most important witnesses. You had Nicole Olson. You had Vivian Reeves even. Her testimony kind of meant something because What she doesn't tell you speaks volumes. Jane Roy, Joanna Turner, called by the defense, Mark Turner, the Hamiltons, Angela and Alan, Charles Cummings, Derek Threedos, 9. They came and told you what happened. It doesn't matter. Let's say the sheriff's office, just for the sake of argument, asked one question of each of those witnesses. Does that mean when they came in here and testified about what they saw and what they observed, it doesn't mean anything?
Wow.
Of course not. It doesn't matter in this case. Not a single bit. You could just remove the sheriff's office from the whole case in this case. Now, there are some investigations where it really does matter. Thankfully, it's not this case. It's a big, shiny object. We absolutely agree they could have done a better job. Not only do we have all those witnesses, we have the silent witness, the video that tells you what had happened. The detectives, this is shiny object number 3. The detectives didn't have the qualifications. They didn't know enough about self-defense to be involved in this case. All right, let's talk about that. Doesn't mean a single thing. Okay, you have a defendant here who has all this law enforcement experience. It's not some unsophisticated person that for the first time he's ever been interviewed. And when you listen to the post-Miranda statement, he's asked plenty of questions. But let's say he was just asked one question. Do you really believe that this defendant didn't understand what was important to tell the detectives and that the interview was the defining moment? He knew enough to make up a story to justify an unlawful shooting. Perception distortion, he's throwing out this terminology. He knows what's going on. Perception distortion is not when you make up an attack that never happened, okay? That's just called being untruthful. It has absolutely no bearing in this case, Saul. It's a shiny object, means nothing. So when their paid witness takes the stand and says, oh, you'd like to ask them these questions, at the second time, when, and it's on tape, Detective Proctor, when he goes back to him, he says, hey, is there anything you want to tell me? No. But you know what he does says? You know what he says? We'll talk about it again later. You know
what does he does says?
I'm second guessing.
We just got that puppy
This incredible
like
hit that
now.
scared him to death that no one saw. I'm not really sure that happened. That's what he says. You don't get second chances when you kill somebody. It's a shiny object.
That's actually
Shiny
not what he
object number
said.
4, witness contamination. You can talk about it with
He said he
50
knows
witnesses,
he got
you can yell
hit. He
about it,
doesn't
it
know
means
how
nothing,
he
it
got
becomes
hit.
shinier. There is no evidence at all of witness contamination in this case. In fact, we have so much evidence against it.
Dude, I wonder
you
why
think
my
about
mic sometimes comes in just
Okay?
super hot.
First, you go with the basic premise. No one really knew each
Yeah,
other.
it does
and they
occasionally.
wouldn't
It's
get
not
together in
common.
the theater to conspire to frame Curtis Reeves. Well, then you might say, well, maybe they just absorbed some information and it was planted in their mind like Inception, and now they're testifying. That is ridiculous. That's the very definition.
Well,
of
you
an
can
unreasonable
imagine
doubt.
I'm not adjusting
And you
the
had an opportunity
volume
to see them on the
manually
stand.
on the microphone in the middle of the
Judge them and
stream.
Observe how they were testifying.
So it's probably a
here's the point
software
that I'm
issue
making.
when it happens. My
Think
apologies.
about Joanna Turner and Mark Turner and that testimony.
And Tina Turner.
Joanna Turner, some of what she said I would state to you is credible, some is not credible. And we'll talk about Joanna Turner in a little bit. But with
Was Joanna
witness
Turner their
contamination,
witness?
That shiny object, think about this. They lived together. Joanna Turner said she spoke to Mark Turner. She shared her information about this thermos that just for whatever reason, she believes there's a thermos somewhere. Well, we know there's no thermos. She said it actually wasn't a cell phone. We don't know what happened there. But my point is this. They shared that information.
It's your
Did Mark Turner
witness.
come in here? Did he take the stand and say, oh, I saw a thermos too? No, it's the opposite of witness contamination. She shared information with Mark, but they testified differently because they came in here under oath. They told you what they saw, what they heard, and what they observed. It's the opposite
I think it's
of
because
witness
her
contamination.
her
It's what's
husband
supposed
was
to happen.
immune to the bullshit argument that
It's
there
a
was
very shiny object, witness contamination. It
thermos.
sounds terrible, but it didn't happen. And there's no proof at all. Well, there's people
One of our
sitting at a
witnesses
table.
said
Who are
something
these people?
retarded. Therefore, none of the witnesses
Any
were
proof Derek Freehoff
coordinating
got
their
with Mark Turner, or
testimony.
that Mark Turner got with Charles Cummings, or Charles Cummings got with Alan Hamilton? That's pure speculation and an unreasonable doubt. It's a shiny object. All right, shiny object number 5. Detective Proctor interviewed 2 witnesses, which are the Hamiltons, for 5 minutes off tape. What does that mean? That means this. Detective Proctor interviewed 2 witnesses off tape for 5 minutes.
At least 2.
That's all it means.
I actually have no idea if he interviewed more
They
people
came in
off
here and they
tape.
testified. Shiny object number 6. We already touched on that. The detective's interview. Maybe they weren't asking the right questions. The defendant knows what he had to say. He made up an entire story. The witnesses came in here. They told you what they saw, what they heard, what they observed. Shiny object number 7. A holster was in Detective Proctor's drawer for 1 week locked up. Oh my goodness.
He says it was there, locked
in his
up.
drawer for a week. So what does that mean in this case? What does this shiny object mean? It means this. There was a holster in Detective Proctor's drawer locked up for a week. That's exactly what it means. Now, if this holster was important because it was a whodunit case, because there was blood or something on it, and it would degrade in his drawer for a week, well, then it's a big deal. It wouldn't be a shiny object then. It would be a big deal. Is this case
No,
about
it's
the
always
holster?
a big deal. Just so you guys
Or is this
know.
case about the defendant shooting another person? Obviously, you know the answer.
He's not
defendant
careful with
started it,
evidence. What
defendant
else
ended
isn't
it.
he careful with?
Shiny object.
Oh, he's also not careful
number
with
8.
witness testimony.
The video surveillance
Also not
was
careful with
taken by
video
top
surveillance.
theater employees, and all the way out of state it goes. And then it comes back in a box that no one opened until it had to be
Missing
opened.
5 hard drives.
All right. What does that shiny object mean? It means
With gaps
this.
in the footage.
The DVRs from the Cobb Theater were taken, and they went all the way
The
out
gaps
of
are due to
state.
the motion detection.
And then
Do
they
we know
came
that?
back in a box that was locked until someone had to open it. And now you get to see that very video, a video from the state and the video from the defense. And when you watch it, whatever the subtle differences are, it basically tells you what happened, because that's the silent witness. It did go, and it came back.
Escobar is
Watch.
taking notes.
End of
folks.
story. It's a shiny object. Was it the best practice? Of course not. No one would argue it's the best practice, but it doesn't matter.
It's the type of practice that could get you a disciplinary action as a detective because it could ruin a case.
Shiny object number 9. This is the testimony of Jennifer Shaw, Matt Reeves, and to some extent Joanna Turner.
Amazing what
Let me
he's
be very
doing here.
clear
He's
at
raising
this point.
reasonable doubt.
Jennifer
problem is
Shaw
he's a
and Matt
prosecutor. He's
Reeves
supposed to be
are
eliminating
absolutely
reasonable
not
doubt.
Bad people. They are not bad people at all. They're good people. But in this particular case, for this time frame, testifying for the defendant, they're just not credible. Has nothing to do with who they are as people. They're just too biased because they're too close. Now,
Where
let's
did you
talk about
ever
Jennifer Shaw's
impeach their
testimony.
credibility?
You remember she took the stand and she started crying. And I'm not making fun of the testimony. I just have to point out to you things that were just not right. So she takes the stand and she starts crying. And what's the first thing that she cries about? You know what? My dad asked me for the first time to help him. It was so shocking to me. He was deteriorating before my eyes. And she starts to cry.
She didn't
And
say he
this
was
is over the
deteriorating
kayak paddles.
before my eyes.
Now, this is why cross-examination is good. You know, it's good for the state. It's good for the defense. Absolutely. It's the purpose of it. So what really came out after the tears about the deterioration of the defendant? What happened that day?
Well, she made you look like a little
Paddles.
bitch on
Kayak
cross.
paddles were actually stuck. And together, they twisted and pulled. Now, there's a lot of times that we went through probably some incredibly painstaking questions about physical ability. And if you were watching this trial and you just tuned in, you were probably like, what in the world? are you all talking about? Well, you all know what we are talking about and why we are doing it. Because if there's the suggestion that the defendant shot and killed another person in a movie theater because he perceived himself as vulnerable, because he's a fragile egg that at any moment can break and be killed by either popcorn or even a fist, we got to address it.
Yeah, a fist.
And that's the reason why we did it. Did it seem like a lot of information? Sure. There's probably points in times where you were like, oh my God, we can skip these 7 hours. But it was important to bring up. So Jennifer Shaw, she's crying. I'm watching my father deteriorate before my eyes. But all that happened was the paddles were stuck, and together they were able to twist and pull, and boom, after 10 minutes together of doing that physical activity, they were able to pull the paddles apart.
There are four legal elements to this legal defense of self-defense. The state needs to disprove any one of them beyond a reasonable doubt. And I don't see him addressing any of them.
Okay. Actions.
He's explaining away how weak his case is.
The defendant's words don't mean anything, meaning his statement to police and on the stand. His actions, what you observe and what other people say, mean everything.
If he had said something else, his words would have meant everything.
Dr. Foley in a second about
and he's focused quite a lot on words that don't mean anything. This is such dishonesty. It's embarrassing.
What can the defendant do? What did Jennifer Shaw tell you the defendant can do? He can bike, right? Mountain bike, road bike. He can kayak, wiki-wachi. That's 3 or 4 hours of paddling, lots of turns. He would hunt, walks around the neighborhood. Pulls a wagon, washes cars, pressure washes the house, mows, in Florida.
By the way, the 3 to 4 hours, lots of paddling, not in evidence.
Electric lawnmower. Washes cars, prunes, hedges, shoots sporting clays, shoots bows and arrows. The list went on and on and on. Just days before
you just said the whole thing.
What was he doing? Did he perceive himself as this vulnerable, fragile egg as he went 10 feet up into a tree to hunt? Walk at 100 yards each time, was able to sit in the car for long car rides, could drive up to North Carolina. And
he's able to sit silly, for long car rides.
All those things take coordination. And if you have so much arthritis and you're deteriorating to that point, you can't do it because it's not the right picture being painted. That's why it's an incredible, shiny object. Matthew Reeves, the only person to say it was new.
Pay no attention to all this evidence. This is not the evidence you were looking for.
In this case, too close to home. Joanna Turner. Joanna Turner was called by the defense. Now, why didn't we call Joanna Turner? So think about this. Let's say there's a traffic crash. You got 5, 6, 7, 8 witnesses that tell you the light was red. And they don't know each other. And there's no reason they'd make it up. And then you have one person that says, you know what, I saw the light was green. What would your common sense tell you? It would tell you, you go with the red group.
Only if you're the prosecution.
Joanna Turner, the shiny object.
Ignore this contrary evidence.
The green group. For whatever reason, she perceived something that resembled a thermos. There's no thermos, but I specifically asked her. Now, her testimony, I'm sure you all recognize this. You use your own opinion. Maybe the last person that spoke to her, that would be the answer she'd say. But what she said was for sure it wasn't a cell phone. Now, we're going to talk about the cell phone in a little bit. That's an incredibly shiny object.
I don't recall the testimony saying that.
So there was no thermos. Now, let's just say there was a thermos and there's no evidence there was. What did she say? Well, at the time that I saw this flicking motion of what she perceived to be a thermos, she didn't even think anything violent was happening because she just went back to watch the preview. But that's why we didn't call Joanna Turner. Not that
she didn't call Joanna Turner because she saw something thrown.
Correctly. Why bring that evidence before you?
It also goes to the point that not everybody could see or hear clearly as you said they could. It might have been a little dark or bright or loud or distracting.
Number 10, the testimony of Dr. Foley, Dr. Adams, and Dr. Cohen. Dr. Adams charges $450 an hour. You would remember him. He used to be the medical examiner at the Hillsborough County. took the stand, went through an incredible amount of information. Basically, this was the testimony, I believe. Dr. Adams was speculating about all the possible events that could happen to the human body. At some future time, in some unknown way, with some unknown variable, hitting some part of the body might possibly, maybe hurt somebody or kill them. That was basically his testimony. But here is really the telling moment with Dr. Adams. Now remember, of course, he's being paid. Now, I'm not telling you that people that come to testify shouldn't be paid. They got to pay their bills. Of course they should be paid. But you can consider that as part of their bias, right? So he's paid $450 an hour. Now think about this. What's important in this case? Well, we have eyewitness testimony. We have
Of course, the prosecutor works for free.
Chad Olson did reach over. He should, though, okay? And he grabbed the bag of popcorn. He flicked it, and as his hand was coming back, once that act was completed, he was shot and killed. Nothing was happening from that moment on. His hand was coming back from the popcorn, and that's when he was shot. So the defense asked Dr. Adams, well, why don't we see stippling on his fingers? And the answer was, now you rely on your own recollection. Remember what the attorney said.
Because I'm about to lie to you.
Yeah.
I recall he said that because he had a fist, that's why there was no stippling. Well, Mr. Martin got up, and Mr. Martin was cross-examining him and said, well, at a previous time, didn't you say that it was because his fingers were outside the cone of the stippling?
He said, no, that's not what I
didn't
said.
say that. And they went back and forth for a little bit.
Because he didn't say that.
Finally, the document is shown to Dr. Adams, and what's he say? You know what?
Finally, it's shown to him.
He's a very intelligent guy. He used to be the head of the medical examiner's office. I didn't understand Mr. Martin's question. So Mr.
Yeah, because Mr. Martin asked a
today
bad
you said you
question.
didn't understand the question, and I asked it again. You didn't ask during that sworn statement for me to repeat it. You must have understood it. Again, he's not some bozo. He's a very intelligent person. Now, how is it then that he didn't understand such an important question? I mean,
That's how damaging that testimony was to the state.
Well, once he's confronted with it, and he's like, well, gosh, I really can't say that. I mean, I had to have understood it. Then what did he say? The court reporter took it down wrong. Because she's got some motive to do that.
He didn't.
You can mistype a word. You can misspell it. You can switch a word around, but you can't change the entire context of a statement. I mean, this Dr. Adams wasn't credible. Dr. Foley, we already talked about him. That's the x-rays.
Every witness against me wasn't credible.
We're not going to go through all of Jennifer Shaw's testimony again. Dr. Cohen came in, and she told you that when people get older, they age, and their bodies change. And you know what? When people get older, they do age, and their bodies do change. In fact, the defendant was older, and his body changed. Doesn't mean a single thing. Let's say he was sitting in a theater with 2 broken legs and a rotator cuff injury, and someone threw popcorn on him. Oh, well, now that he's got 2 broken legs, he can shoot and kill somebody. That totally makes sense. You know what? His back's hurting really bad. He's got a herniated disc. Popcorn goes on him. Yep, absolutely. We can kill him. Sure, you get older, you can just kill people. But actions speak louder than words. All of that testimony are shiny objects. And she talked about people perceiving themselves as vulnerable. And if they perceive themselves as vulnerable, that's why they may do a certain action. Is the testimony and the evidence and the video in this case, does it demonstrate that the defendant perceived himself as vulnerable?
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's why he shot. That was the testimony.
Did he try to de-escalate things because he felt vulnerable? He leaned in twice to Chad Olson. He instigated. He started. Did he perceive his health as deteriorating? I mean, all these little things we talked about seem so silly. And I almost hate to bring them up. But the week before, he's hunting and going up in trees. That day, he drives. It sounds silly, but his wife could have driven. Could have dropped him off at the front if he was such and such poor shape that day. They chose the back row, for crying out loud, all the way in the middle.
Anyone who's been around a single old person knows how ludicrous this argument is.
We all know how uncomfortable that is. And yes, of course he used the wall for balance. No one wants to step on people's toes.
I've never walked through a theater and used a wall for balance.
You perceive yourself as vulnerable.
Never
You don't do
once.
a single thing the defendant did in this case. And it just goes along with his statement. It's so untrue. And that's why you keep going back to, it sounds sensationalized, but he started it, he ended it, and he killed someone over a popcorn toss. The last shiny object.
Or
And
you
then we're
about
going to talk
that?
about the facts of the case with the law. Cell phone DNA.
Again, he's making a
more
defense
you
style
talk about
argument
it,
of
the louder
raising
you talk
reasonable
about it,
doubt
this
in
makes
the
it
defense's
shiny.
argument.
Look over here,
That's
don't
not
look
his
over
job.
here. Why is there no DNA on that cell phone? I mean, obviously you all know why. There's no way ever.
Well, there is DNA.
Fact pattern.
There is, yeah, there is absolutely
I'll
DNA.
rephrase. Thank you.
I'll
There
rephrase.
is DNA that is uninterpretable. It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. There is no way ever that phone was used in this case against the defendant. Ever. Not a single witness sees this phone event take place. And
The silent witness
his
does.
wife, who's sitting next to him, do you think that she would have seen a violent attack with a cell phone happen if she's sitting right next to him? Well, I closed my eyes. Come on, really? All the people in the theater didn't see it. The silent witness video doesn't see it. The defendant has no injuries. How in the world is that even remotely possible? Oh, that's right. His left eyelid had a red mark behind his glasses.
Oh,
Now,
there's
one
an
reason I had
injury.
his glasses passed around is just to show you that the hard part on the nose is there, like on most glasses. And if he was hit in the face, he'd have a mark. It'd cut him. If it was that hard that he literally thought he was going to die at some point, because that's how
Could cut
violent
him,
Chad Olson
not
was.
would.
The most easily bruisable person, because he testified he's easily bruisable.
On his arms and
Didn't Shaw
legs.
testified he's easily bruisable. A phone is thrown at him. Now he changed his story. First he said he was hit with a fist. Maybe the hand had a phone in it. Now the phone was thrown at him. This phone never, ever touched him in that manner. Ever. Ever. And if you remember, there's so much information that comes about sometimes. You know, you almost have to be like an encyclopedia of knowledge. If you remember back when he was testifying, he said something really interesting if you caught it. Okay? He said, because you couldn't see Chad Olson in the picture frame, that he was too far away from him when he threw that phone. Very interesting that he said that. But here's something else. Remember, he changed his story because in the post-Miranda statement, when Chad Olson jumped up, the popcorn fell. So based on his statement, and you have to listen to the whole thing because he talks about it and then they go over it. He says the popcorn went by the wayside almost immediately, which means when you see that video and Chad Olson standing up, we shouldn't see the popcorn or we should see it fall. But what we really see is popcorn being tossed and then a shot takes place. That's how we know with 100% certainty the defendant wasn't being truthful. But what's he say? He says that when Chad Olson stands up and the popcorn falls by the wayside, it's at that time this attack happens that's not seen on video or by anybody in the theater, including his wife.
Well, except for the person that you said lied about it. She saw it.
Really
she just thought it was a thermos.
He saw the phone, so he just put two and two together. But on the stand, he talks about this phone attack happening 8 seconds before. How in the world is that? He changed his story. Now we have two unreasonable stories I submit to you. Self-serving stories don't equal self-defense. If he was hit by a phone, or even if
they don't have to prove self-defense, dude. You have to disprove it.
Raging mad. How in the world does he not have an injury other than a left eyelid behind glasses?
So now he does have an injury.
Any injury.
He was explosive and he was mad about the popcorn. That's what this case is. He started it and he ended it. Those are the shiny objects. So let's talk about what this case is. What's the credible evidence? You take those shiny objects, you put them away. What's the credible evidence in this case? We know that the Olsons came to the theater on a Monday. They dropped their daughter off at daycare. They sit in the theater, second and back, last row. We know at some point one of them wanted another piece of candy or something. Chad Olson goes out.
Alcohol.
To the session I believe if you look at the video, it looks like they're there first. It doesn't matter. Then the defendant and his wife sit behind them. He has his phone. He's not talking. He's not conducting business. The light's on. Previews come on. Now, according to Jane Roy, who doesn't know anybody and would have no reason to come in here, say anything other than what she observed, she said almost immediately after the cell phone message came on, boom, here comes the defendant. Now, it's the previews. I'm not saying he should have his cell phone on. Certainly doesn't justify what happened to him. And do you really believe that this
The
cell
offense of
phone
saying,
light
hey, can
was
you
so
turn your cell phone
incredibly
off?
bright that it was
That
ruining
one?
his movie experience for the previews? Anyway, that's not even a big issue whatsoever. So what
Yeah,
happens?
that sounded
Defendant
stupid.
leans in.
Forget I
Now,
said that.
submit to you based on all the evidence that you've heard, he does not lean in and say, sir, I'd really
Like everybody
appreciate
doesn't
if you
understand that
just turn your
having a
cell phone off."
illuminated iPhone in a dark theater wouldn't
Not
be
the
annoying.
guy that is into the adrenaline and the danger and likes to be in control.
It's so annoying that there's a
Olson
literal
and Jane
announcement
Roy,
for
who
it in
don't
the
know each
theater.
other, testified about the defendant's demeanor.
And the theater
He
manager
leaned in,
testified that
and
you
he
could
was
actually
telling
remove someone
Chad
for doing it.
to turn his phone off. He did it twice. Now, with a person who perceives himself as vulnerable, oh, I don't want, I got a lot of things going on. I don't want to really get into any roughshod, and I can always de-escalate it with my background training experience. Does that guy get up right away to go to tell the manager? No, he's got to lean in a second time and tell him he's going to the manager. Why do you have to tell someone you're going to the manager?
Because the
Get
guy
up
might
and go to the
say,
manager.
sorry, pal, I'll turn it
Well,
off.
He wants Chad Olson to know. So he leans and tells him. So he gets up, he goes. Now, what does Jane Roy say? He's mumbling to himself. He appears agitated. He appears angry. And this is when it starts to begin, when we're talking about ill will, hatred, spite, or evil intent. And it culminates, whatever how many minutes later it is. I don't know if it's 3, 4, 5, it doesn't matter. But it culminates after the popcorn when he explodes, throw popcorn in my face. This is when it starts. Because Chad Olson, should he have turned his phone off? Sure. But he's like, look, man, just leave me alone. Mind your own business. Do what you got to do. So he gets up and he goes to the manager.
So he did.
Jane Roy testified that he appeared agitated. Now, we have a video that's in evidence. You watch it. I'm not saying that he was at the desk yelling and screaming. Witnesses came in and said, okay, he was there and he was talking. Now, these witnesses testified. I think her name is Simpson and maybe Mr.
Are they in a conspiracy?
That, well, he came.
The witnesses that said he was calm.
He was polite. But when you watch his mannerisms, he could very well be polite, but he was certainly agitated. And remember something that Vivian Reeves testified to. These are just little nuggets. If you don't recall it this way, absolutely do not just take it from me. You have to rely on your own.
I'm lying. Just ignore it.
But she said she was kind of ticked off. Now, he goes and he tells the manager. Now, he doesn't tell the manager, this guy's telling me to F off, nothing like that. But a guy that's trained in de-escalation, as to not be an instigator, what could he have done? He could have stayed and waited for the manager to go. Well, when I asked him that question on cross, what did he say? Oh, the manager told me to go back. He still could have stayed there. He could have waited for the manager. Just because the manager tells him to go back, all of a sudden, oh yeah, if he was really concerned.
That you could have done something differently doesn't mean you don't have a privilege of defending yourself against a violent attack.
And what purpose? So he's supposed to just stand there forever?
Missed the movie.
And what happens? Chad Olson, either he put it away or he turned it off. It doesn't matter. It truly doesn't matter. The point being this. The issue
well, it does matter because if he put it away, he couldn't have thrown it.
Experience.
We know he didn't put it away. We found it on the floor.
The person that's trained in de-escalation, does he sit back down in his seat and let it go? What's he do? He initiates again. He pokes him. I see you put your phone away. I wouldn't have had to go telling you. Why in the world does he have to say
contact?
that? Because he's the alpha male. He wants to let him know. Because he's used to being in control. It's like getting in the last word with a kid. It's spiteful.
Wait, do you get last words in with kids?
Right
so say he was spiteful. that strips
Chad
him of the
Olson,
right to
let's see.
defend himself against a physical
As the
attack?
defendant states,
I don't
there
think
are
so.
some gems in there. Okay, the defendant states that he then turns around.
Well, there's
in
the
his
spiteful
seat. And there's a
exception to
big difference.
self-defense.
In
If you wrote a book on
versus
it, you might
jumping up.
know.
I
the
punched him
reason-
because he had the last word.
And I gave those photos to you, the defense photos, was for you to see with your own eyes that he was, in fact, turning around in his seat to have this conversation. And who's that consistent with? Derek Threedos. Remember what Derek Threedos' testimony was? Going back,
It was
before the
fabulous.
meeting, Derek Threedos testified he heard bickering. Bickering is an interesting word to choose. When your kids bicker, you know your kids are kind of like back and forth. They're not having a friendly conversation. There's bickering. So when the defendant wants you to believe, sir, I'd really like for you to turn your phone off. That's not what Derek Threedos testified to. And what Derek Threedos say? When he went to the manager, everything settled down. Homeostasis, everything's fine. And when does the bickering start up again? When who is reintroduced into the equation? The great instigator.
The great instigator.
Now it's back up again. Because he started it and he ended it. So Chad Olson turns around in his seat, and I gave you those
He
pictures
started
to
it
look
and he
at,
ended
because
it.
had
The
he been standing,
catchphrase
he
for the
would have
prosecution's
looked the way
closing.
that he looked
One
at the
start,
time
one
that he
end,
was shot, at the
one
time that the
defendant.
popcorn came into play. He's standing there. He turned around in his seat before. Now remember, Derek Threedos told you, and even the defendant said this, at no time was Chad Olson turning around prior to the popcorn and initiating a conversation with the defendant. He was always looking forward. He was the one out of the two that was trying to de-escalate it. Now, he could have remained quiet, but I submit to you, the defendant would have just kept going and going and going. But he's looking forward. Leave me alone, sir. Leave me alone. If anybody, Chad Olson is trying to de-escalate the situation from the person.
Actually, it was him who was de-escalating.
So what happens? The credible testimony is this, that at some point in time, he does get up. And at some point in time, it's clear as day what he does. He leans over and he grabs the popcorn and he flicks it on. Is it reasonable to believe that this defendant, with all his background, training experience, and his karate experience that we're going to absolutely address in a little bit,
His karate experience, the 71-year-old karate
from him,
ninja.
he was going to die? Because that's what some of the instruction for the law of self-defense is. Did he reasonably believe he was going to die right then and there? There is no way in the world.
That's not the
Or
legal
did he
standard.
reasonably believe that he was about to suffer great bodily harm? Now, there may be an argument made, well, you know, he didn't know that he was going for the popcorn. He just saw a hand coming at him.
Then you just articulated
We're gonna address that whole
self-defense.
thing right now. First of all, we know it's about the popcorn because that's the statement. Don't lose fact of that.
Lose fact of
Okay?
that?
If you hear, oh, a hand's coming at him, he reasonably believed because a hand was coming at
You
him.
see it right in the
No,
video.
he killed them because of the popcorn, because he said that right after the shooting. Throw popcorn in my face. He knew what happened. It's not just a hand's coming towards him. He knew what it was. And when you watch the video, you see the popcorn and you see from the hip the shot. That's this case. Let's say you want to make the argument that he didn't know about the popcorn. You'd have to disbelieve Derek Threedos, Mark Turner, Charles Cummings.
No, you don't have
And
to
let's say you
disbelieve
wanna make
them.
the
You just have
argument
to
he
think
saw a
that they
hand
might
coming
be
at him.
mistaken. The same argument you made about other
Did he
witnesses.
reasonably believe that that hand was going to kill him? Absolutely not. Did he reasonably believe that that hand was going to punch him so hard that his orbital bone was going to fracture and go into his brain? Come on, no, that's unreasonable. And you can't shoot somebody for punching you.
Come
You
on,
can't.
man.
Oh, he's vulnerable.
Wait.
That's what no, he's not.
You can
He's an
shoot someone for
instigator.
punching
He's not
you.
this vulnerable person. Okay, so he's sore. You can't kill anybody for that.
Again, you
So
just
Chad
misstated the
Olson
law.
stands up. Now, there's a lot of dynamics going on. He grabs the popcorn, he tosses it, he's shot and killed. In that time frame, Nicole Olson's standing up, and she's just like, honey, come on. Now, the defendant wants you to believe there's this royal battle between Chad and Nicole. How is it no one sees this royal battle?
Oh, she was shot through the hand.
And Reeves, who's right there, not see this battle. If you want to say, well, Nicole Olson's saying there's no battle because she's got an interest in the case, how does Vivian Reeves not see a battle right in front of her eyes? How does no one hear or see this?
No one characterized that interaction as a battle. Nobody.
Was this a life and death struggle?
When the state has to mischaracterize evidence like this, they're just lying someone into prison.
Come on. So
Well, you don't remember the testimony about the great battle
of
the Theater Rose?
And we know why.
Because she was holding her husband back?
So what's the law in this case? What was the defendant charged with?
Yes, the phone was checked for texting Karen O, and he was not texting. I mean, that doesn't matter. That what he was doing on his phone actually doesn't matter, but he did lie about the texting thing.
There's a lot of laws that apply to this case. At first glance, it might seem confusing. It's going to be like a law school class. We're going to talk about it. So the defendant has been charged with second-degree murder.
Justin Larmore, I'm not being dishonest at all.
It's the same exact crime. For whatever reason, in the jury instructions, they flip them around. It's the same crime. He's also been charged with the crime of aggravated battery. That's for shooting Nicole Olson. Now, at the beginning of the instruction for second-degree murder, you're going to hear about this. This is called Introduction to Homicide.
So these will be jury instructions, not statutes.
We're going to say it's not going to work right here. It'll work. That's all right. I'll give you a second. All right. So let's use this one just for now. Okay. Don't need that other one. All right. So introduction.
You can't get the easel to work.
Make sure everybody can see this. If I put this right here, can everybody see it?
Look at poor Matt there. Doesn't get to sit behind the desk.
Why didn't they blow these up more to actually fill out the card?
Okay. All right. Introduction to homicide. So this is the instruction that you're going to hear. In this case, Curtis Reeves is accused of murder in the second degree. Murder in the second degree includes the lesser crime of manslaughter, which we're going to talk about, which is unlawful. A killing that is excusable or was committed by the justifiable use of deadly force is lawful. If you find Chad Olson was killed by Curtis Reeves, you will then consider the circumstances surrounding the killing and deciding if the killing was murder in the second degree or manslaughter, or whether the killing was excusable or resulted from justifiable use of deadly force. So let's talk about justifiable homicide. This is the instruction. The killing of a human being is justifiable homicide and lawful if necessarily done. So let's talk about that. Every word in jury instructions is important. Okay? Necessarily is very important in this instruction, meaning, was it absolutely necessary and it makes sense? Because if you're taking a human life, you got to be 100% sure. There's no gray area when you're taking another person's life.
No, there is.
That's actually, yeah, just misstated the law entirely.
And lawful if necessarily done while resisting an attempt to murder. Okay, we'll just throw that one out. We know there's no attempt to murder the defendant. While
Actually don't
resisting
know
attempt to
that,
murder
but-
or commit a felony upon the defendant, or to commit a felony in any dwelling house. All right, so that's this last sentence here is about in the home, doesn't apply. We're going to move here. Okay. So was it necessary while resisting an attempt to commit a felony? All right, so let's talk about that. And that's why I'm talking to you about necessary. Okay. We're going to talk about this in just a second. I just want you to keep that in mind. Okay. Is it necessary? That's justifiable homicide.
Guys, I'll get to the
Then you
super
learn
chats
about
between the
excusable
two
homicide.
arguments.
Here's excusable homicide. Everybody see that?
Just let you know I see them.